Okay, take two. Hi, everybody. I'm Justice, and I'm a healer, hypnotherapist, and professional, but also dedicated to communication. And I wanted to make this video today to talk about something that I think is really important. That's been coming up a lot. It is how do we interact in healthy and safe ways with intimacy within male-female dynamics. I'm going to preface this conversation by saying that I am a woman. I identify as a woman. I'm heterosexual, but that is in no way meant to exclude anybody who identifies as anything else. This is a conversation about health and intimacy. There we go. Now I can see you guys. That makes me feel better. Because the whole reason that I want to do this is to open up communication around something that I feel is a really sensitive and important topic for all of us. The reason that I'm choosing, well, wait, let's pause because we're going to get into some territory. And I think what's important anytime there's the potential to engage in triggering information or even new information, it's really important to ground in our bodies. So I want to invite all of you guys who are watching to please engage in this conversation. Drop your hearts, your comments, your likes, your shares, so that I know that that you're there. But let's start with just coming into our bodies and just take a breath. If you would like to maybe physically touch yourself to connect with yourself, take in your environment. Notice that right now you are safe, you're secure. If you need to hydrate, the three things that we always want to make sure of anytime that we're engaging in new information, and particularly possibly triggering information, we're breathing, we're hydrated, our body is taken care of, our environment is safe. So we can check that in. And that's going to help us manage our internal reality as well as our reactions. Yeah, there we go. I needed that. I needed that. If I'm going to lead this conversation, I needed that. So, as I said, I'm a healer, I'm a coach, and dedicated to communication. And as a woman, I want to have this conversation because what I'm seeing happening right now in the industry that I'm a part of as a coach is there is this paradigm of coaching that has been emerging. I'm not for sure for how long, but it's called Polarity coaching, and it is essentially teaching men and women about masculine and feminine dynamics, and it is pointing out in an externalized way how women can be more in their feminine and how that can be more powerful for us, and how men can be in their masculine and that can be more powerful for them. What may or may not be addressed, and this is where things kind of get a little bit messy, is the fact that both men and women have internalized components of masculine and feminine energies. And some might say that these energies can only rise in comparison to each other because the feminine does not exist solely and independently, and the masculine does not exist solely and independently. So these are traits and qualities that we identify as being masculine or feminine, but these are human traits and qualities. And these are qualities and traits that we need to become familiar with within ourselves so that we can notice the way that they move and they operate in the world externally, and particularly in regards to our intimate relationships. So I want to slow down and listen, because one of the true gifts of the feminine is our access to intuition, our access to our instincts, our connection with our body and with the unconscious and with sort of the subternal worlds. One of the strong traits of masculine energy is that it is direct, it is penetrating. It has been largely promoted as the primary way of getting things done in the world. And there are toxic traits to both sides of this dynamic. So in no way am I going to pin men to the board, or no way am I going to pin women to the board. As always, I'm more interested in discussing feelings and behaviors and how we can take accountability for those. So to simplify, I would say that the most kind of, if the tendency of masculine consciousness is to be penetrating, then the toxic sort of shadow side of that is that it becomes dominating. If the tendency of feminine consciousness is to be a little bit more internal, a little bit more subtle, then the toxic manifestation of that for a lot of women is that we become manipulative. Men can be manipulators, women can be dominators. This is not honestly about pinning these qualities to either sex. It's about acknowledging the way that they play out intrapersonally, transpersonally, and in the world and in our dynamics. To a large degree, the majority of the consciousness and the way that it's been enacted and unfolded on the cultural, the political, the external scene for the last 2,000 plus years has been masculine dominated, has been largely patriarchal oriented. And I know a lot of you who are listening to this are familiar with the idea of what patriarchy is. Men and women both suffer under the guard and the structure of patriarchy. This is not about one or the other doing better. Because it is more male oriented, men are naturally going to do a little bit better. But they suffer because they too have these tender, soft, empathetic components to themselves that are not welcomed and that are not recognized in society in a meaningful way when the overarching structure is patriarchal. Women do particularly poorly because aside from it completely suppressing and devaluing the feminine nature, it has also been used to subjugate, confuse, and create trauma bonds that women are particularly susceptible to. And one of the reasons for this susceptibility is what is traditionally considered feminine traits are actually fawning responses to trauma. So I want to talk a little bit about trauma just for a minute. Just quick encapsulation: fight, flight, freeze mechanisms. Fight, flight, freeze. I can't speak. Those are the physiological reactions when we're threatened or in danger. The other reaction when we're threatened and in danger is called fawning, and it's a psychological response. And it is essentially what we do when we need to bond, we need to remain attached to a perpetrator. This has also been defined as Stockholm Syndrome. This is particularly important for us to understand and to talk about because this fawning is one of the gateways to grooming people to accept and entertain abuse. So I'm going to pause and just let you kind of consider that. So if in any way you have grown up around people who were not safe for you, you've been in relationships that did not feel safe for you, or you are aware somatically, psychologically, economically of the absolute destructive nature of both capitalism, colonialism, and capitalism, colonialism, industrialism, and the way that that insinuates itself into our soft, sweet bodies, into our psyches, and into our relationships, then fawning is something that is particularly important for us to pay attention and talk about. And I'm going to pause on that thought because August says, not only do we do poorly, we're unable to radiate powerfully. So men are left starved and the cycle of pain continues. That is such a beautiful point, and that is why this is a intrapersonal and transpersonal conversation, because when any of us are suffering due to the nature of empathy and our wiring for empathy, we acknowledge that and we respond to that. So if women are suffering, men can't thrive as a collective. If men are suffering, women can't thrive as a collective. And that's why this going back and forth and this sort of projecting of the pain cycle is only going to perpetuate the pain cycle. It's not going to end it. So pause and consider that. I am a woman who has been deeply wounded by men. Starting with the first man who should have absolutely held my back and held and supported me was not a safe person in any way, shape, or form. And that has gone with me. I can recognize that I could have kind of closed down around that pain. I could have become bitter and poisonous towards men. But fortunately, I also recognize that I have an inner masculine. And to become bitter and poisonous and hateful towards men on the outside world is also hating that inner part of myself, is hating my own masculinity. And I would imagine a lot of women who say, that they're so mad, they're so angry at men. They want to have relationships. And yet, if we haven't dealt with that pain inside of ourselves, then we're going to project that out onto, and specifically largely in our intimate relationships is where it comes out the strongest. Whether you're heterosexual or you identify as being of any other sexuality, the intimate container is where our wounds come up. It's where we explore those deepest places of pain, because it's where we also have the potential to open up to our greatest sort of expressions of joy and connectivity. I'm gonna pause because I want to engage in these comments. The saddest thing is that so many men do not even know what their best can be because of the way that their thoughts have been conditioned by unhealthy patriarchy and forced by it to suppress their full range of healthy emotional expression. Men also are harmed in from a different way from women by the unhealthy dominator patriarchal system. Perhaps if men had any idea how much they too have been harmed, they might be happy to move on from patriarchy and co-create with women a much healthier, nurturing system. Such a system does in fact exist in the matriarchal, woman-respecting, honoring societies that still exist. And in those societies, men are also respected. Men are also respected and they are valued for themselves rather than for their ability to be someone's meal ticket, as in so many patriarchal societies. That is such a valuable point and perspective, Caressa. Thank you so much, because it is a tremendous amount of pressure on men to perform. Men are trained to perform in this way that Carissa is speaking of. They have to be providers, and they have to be strong, and they have to be cut off from their softness and their intuition. And women are trained to perform in a different way to a very large degree, starting from a very young age. We are highly over-sexualized, and this is part of where that conditioning and that fawning response comes from. And I was speaking with August Coyote, who I see up there this morning, and she mentioned something that I thought was absolutely fascinating, is that by sexualizing women, we are trained that we are valuable and desirable, and therefore we deserve protection. Now, if that isn't a mindfuck, because we're also told that those very same qualities and traits, like what I would be wearing, for example, would be cause for me to be questioned why I would have been targeted for being abused or being raped. So it works as this double bind with women, this programming and this performance training and the fawning and the grooming that goes along with it. because it sets us up to believe that if we're going to be protected and we're going to be valued, then there is something innately sexual about that. And yet at the same time, it socially, habitually, familially conditions us to suppress, ignore, and drown out our own intuition and our instincts, which inherently rise to protect us and to keep us safe. So this starts at a very young age for both of us, and this is really important to acknowledge because both men and women are dealing with these different sides of the same kind of conditioning that is actually conditioning us away from unification with each other, away from being able to relate more more consciously and more intimately from the time that we're very young. And I think that some of this sort of what we see in this culture is like allowing boys to move into, like, if they want to play with dolls, let them play with dolls, and all of that. But at the same time, there are real psychological and biological differences between men and women. And in heterosexual relationships, this is where that chemistry and that charge arises, is like women don't necessarily want to be with a man who is like a woman. Men don't want to be with a woman who is like a man. And this is where this polarity coaching paradigm is arising. It's trying to teach men how to be more masculine and trying to teach women how to be more feminine. But what is missing a lot from the conversation is the fact that we both have these components within ourselves internally, and that the healthy interaction with either sex that occurs externally begins with these healthy internal reactions within ourselves. Pause. Consider that. Think about that. And I'm just gonna throw this question out there to you, what are some traits that you consider to be feminine? What are some traits that you consider to be masculine? And please pop them into the comments, because I think that we all have sort of different ideas around what these qualities are and how they best interact with each other. And it's something I would love to see your perspective on it. So please feel free to comment and ask questions. Thomas Moonagel says, how do we even know what is really masculine and what is really feminine, considering how much it varies amongst cultures? There you go. That is a beautiful, beautiful question. Beautiful question. How do we know? Culturally, I think that needs to be taken into consideration. There are lots of cultures, and there are even species where the men are, they do more of the raising of the children. So what does that mean for you? And that's what I want to kind of ask you. What do masculine qualities mean to you? What do feminine qualities mean to you? I would say, in the most gross sense of the word, that biologically, the masculine, the penis, is penetrating. Biologically. The woman, biologically, is receptive. We receive that in order to grow life within us. So this discernment needs to be born about what are we allowing to penetrate us, both as men and women, and what are we receiving and growing inside of ourselves and cultivating. And these are questions that are individual. These are not questions that can be lumped as men should do this and penetrate and deliver this, and women should receive this and grow and respond only to this. And this kind of black and white unilaterality is what is extremely disturbing to me within this coaching paradigm, because it doesn't allow for the gray areas or the entire spectrum of the rainbow. And it certainly doesn't allow for the different nuances to emerge from our internality. And that is inherently dehumanizing and dangerous. August says, what we're seeing is performative coaching to be male or female, not the deeper aspects. Exactly. His questions speak to what most coaches are teaching. Performance. Precisely. At a fundamental level, masculine is the individual and feminine is collective. Oh, I like that concept. M is no, F is yes, penetrate the environment or expand and deepen to include what's arising. Yes, and there was a very interesting conversation that I participated with. Oh God, what's his name? John Perkins. He was the guy who wrote, like, he was the economic hitman. He went and he stayed in these indigenous tribal cultures for years, and he lived with them and amongst them. And the role of the masculine in that environment was to go out, to hunt, to chop wood, to expand out through the jungle. And the role of the feminine in that environment was to say, no, that's enough. So once again, that can be culturally and that can be flipped, because if, as we've seen with sort of the patriarchal dominated industrialism, colonialism, that has been a largely expansive consciousness. It has, it was all about the age of exploration. It was all about conquering, and, we're still doing it. We're still moving out and deeper into the jungle. And for what? For resources to a large degree, for mining to a large degree, just looking at this from a global perspective. And the role of women and the feminine in this is to rise up and say, no, that's enough. And this is predominantly also a conversation around consent and sexuality between men and women. I know that rape happens between all genders and sexes, but if the feminine does not want to be penetrated, if it's had enough, then its no is definitive. There is no further conversation around that. If she's not interested in holding and cultivating and creating what is being presented to her from that masculine component, then her no is definitive. And that is simplified among, like, when it comes to addressing rape culture. So now to come around with that to this sort of toxic model within this polarity coaching system is this idea, this concept that I'm seeing being promoted by some of these teachers. And I'm going to name names here, not because I want to throw anybody under the bus, but because I think it is extremely important for us to have discernment and to protect each other. So the coaches that particularly I have been concerned with and have experienced bullying and blocking from in the last week are Zach Rhodes and David Miller. And I don't want to completely trash them or their systems, but what I want to say is this: the way that they are instructing women that they do not need to say no is dangerous and is grooming women to lose that fundamental relationship with their intuition and their instincts. So I had conversations with them, and their response to my being like, how can you conscionably tell women that they don't need boundaries, that they shouldn't need to use no in relationship, was that women should be enough in their power that if their man is doing something and they simply express how they feel about what this man is doing, that is going to be enough to redirect the course of the relationship and change the current, change the environment. And if it's not, then they should simply leave. So you can see what I'm talking about by where all of these layers and nuances and areas of gray and all of these different colors are missing from a conversation like that. Because as anybody who's ever been in a relationship knows, we want, Thomas says that does sound heavy. We want to believe that our partner is going to be in tune with our needs and is going to be capable and wonderful. But we're all operating from sort of different places within ourselves. We're all able to receive different information in different ways. We're all more capable and skillful from day to day. And no, it's a really important part of the human language. No, it is equally as important as yes. And For a lot of women, and this goes into rape culture. This goes into this sort of endless expansion that we have to deal with. Our no has been so deeply violated already, starting when we were perhaps even children. And this is where it begins. This is where it begins for a lot of us, is like, okay, as a woman in particular, it's like this presenting this bright kind of performative expression of femininity is praised in us from a very young age. I remember my grandmother putting curlers in my hair and dressing me up, and I felt like a little doll, and I got petted, and I got attention, and I got affection for doing it, right? And I think a part of me really just wanted to get dirty and like play in the mud and catch bullfrogs, because I enjoyed doing that as well. And so we're trained. Smile, no matter what you're feeling. Oh, you feel better if you're smiling. No, I won't. I would just be disconnecting the external expression of what's happening with my internality. That's not okay. Don't be angry. You don't really feel that way. And these are, this programming, it's not just it happens to women, it happens to men as well. So habitually, culturally, we're being trained out of our instincts. We're also told, that if there's this person who shows up in our world and you don't want to interact with them, a child, you should interact with them anyways, because it's polite. It's the polite thing to do. I think this happens to boys as well and men, but I guarantee you it happens more to women. August says, we are already terrified of saying no because we want to be wanted and desired and cared for. No means we might be exiled, especially by men. This is biological and cultural. Bingo. Absolutely. And as I was saying before, from our from August in my conversation, is that's wound into us. If we're wanted, then we'll be safe. If we're not wanted, then we'll be rejected. We'll be exiled. And we see so much cultural programming where sexuality is used, particularly in regards to women and the female body, that it's like the highest sort of compliment for us is to be wanted. And that doesn't take into account the internality. That just takes into the account the physicality. And our physical is extremely important, but being wanted for our feelings, being wanted for our ideas, being wanted even though we want to say no, is equally as important. Tim Rhea says, what's the first thing a child develops in his or her terrible twos? No, absolutely. And that is such an important part, because it is a key developmental phase, and it is absolutely fundamental in us navigating what feels good and feels right for us versus what we're being told we're supposed to be or do. Now, to come back to this model of coaching, these men are telling women what they're supposed to be or do. And here's the thing. There is a lot of over masculinity that happens with women, because that is how we have been conditioned. It is okay for us to move through the world in power, because that is the external model for what power looks like. It has been patriarchal. It has been very masculinized. That's not true power. That is trauma adaptations and armoring. So yes, women, we're armored. We're angry. We're suspicious. I wrote about this recently. We're angry, we're armored, we're suspicious. Of course we are. We've been gaslit, we've been abused, we've been raped, we've been subjugated. And only within like the last 150 years have we really been even able to be remotely equal members in society. So yeah, of course we feel that way. And those feelings are valid. However, if we want to reconnect with our actual power, we need to process and move through those wounds. And the way that we process and move through wounds is actually by But the way that we take off armor is we process and we move through those wounds. We need to be able to say no in order to do that. We need to be able to create an environment for ourselves where it's okay, where it's safe for us to take off the armor. And that means having boundaries. So these men who are attempting to condition women into disarming their boundaries in what may potentially be an unsafe situation is grooming women for predation. And that is unacceptable, and that is scary, and that needs to be called out. And that's why I mentioned their names, and that's why I would highly encourage you to be mindful if you're going to interact with them, if you're going to interact with anybody. Our bodies are going to let us know if we're safe. Our bodies are going to either relax in somebody's presence or tense up. Our bodies are going to, and we can do this with reading information or even listening to somebody's voice. So I wrote a post about this recently too. If you're going to put yourself in the position of working with someone, a coach or a healer in particular, you are going to be opening yourself up to this person at the most intimate level. Your body needs to feel safe. Okay, I want to... Tim Reyes says, oh, wait, no, we've got more no's. Our no is what teaches men how to show up powerfully and integrally. Absolutely. And if these men don't want to listen to these women's no, it is because they themselves are more in that dominator mindset. And that's not healthy for them. That's not healthy for us. And all that's potentially going to arise from that is this sort of unhealthy, unnatural submissiveness that does not actually facilitate intimacy or connection. And it makes it impossible to communicate because you're constantly afraid of disappointing or of being rejected or of being told that you're wrong or being exiled like we talked about. And eventually that mask is going to slip. A performance is only able to be upheld for so long by either party. And who knows what is underlying that surface, what is upholding those masks for either women or men who are playing out that dominator submissive dynamic is quite potentially likely going to turn into abusiveness, is going to turn into layers of projection and confusion and potentially even violence. When we lose our no, we lose our power to actually nourish the masculine and guide him deeper into expression. Absolutely. Because if we can't say no, then we can't really truly say yes either. And they can't trust us. If we can't say no to them, if they don't actually know what we truly want and how we really feel and how we're experiencing our interface with them in reality, then they can't really trust us either. As men step into their divine feminine, I have seen women being more the dominant figure to suppress and control the man completely in the wrong way. And that is the shadow side of that, absolutely. And there may be a sense of relief for a woman who has been abused or who has been subjugated or who has, all of us have this programming. It's like, oh, finally, like I can step into being more powerful. But what's actually happening is we're projecting our own woundedness and we're projecting our own dominator outwards. And this is why it is extremely important for all of us, men and women, to identify, become familiar with, and to actually build a relationship with our own inner predator, because we all have one. And if we're not familiar with the way that it operates, you can look at this by, monitoring the voice in your head. You can look at this by the way that you tend to take advantage of situations, qualities of manipulation, qualities of dominance. These are all traits of the predator, and we all have one. And they're teaching men to do the same. Yes. Okay. And let's come back to that. So the toxicity within this system is that within this polarity system, and it's not all polarity teachers that are doing it. I mentioned those two names, Zach and David, because I have seen it in that community. I have experienced it firsthand. There are other people who are doing it, and there are other people who are teaching polarity in a much more healthy kind of integrated way. And I think our bodies need to be the key if we're at all curious about exploring this information. Do you feel safe? Do you feel seen? Do you feel respected? Do you notice that there is mutuality and that there is respect and that there is vulnerability coming from these teachers? Because they particularly do not feel that they need to be vulnerable. They are incapable of taking criticism. They're incapable of acknowledging that anybody else that is showing up in their feed within these conversations might have something of benefit to offer because they have moved so solidly into this dominated role of teacher that they're unable to hear or listen to anybody else. That is always an indication that a teacher is not trustworthy, because as teachers, our primary goal should be to fucking listen. Love you guys. Okay. And yeah, okay. Surrender is potent, but we have to feel safe. Yes. And a leader or coach needs to demonstrate his trustworthiness. It's not something that can be demanded. Yes. We don't demand trust of each other. That's not how it works. We don't say to a woman or to a man, I can see you're hurt and confused, and that you're not grokking what I'm saying or what I'm asking of you. Well, that's what I'm demanding. And that is exactly what I've experienced from both of these men. And my attempts at engagement were at first curious and respectful. And then as I noticed the flow of gaslighting and fawning that was going on in the threads, I became a little bit more cautious and protective. And then I became a little bit more flippant and sarcastic, as is my tendency. And then I got blocked. So I'm okay with that. I actually kind of wear it as a badge of honor, because in my reality, blocking is an absolute last result to inhuman behavior. And there was nothing inhuman about my behavior, but what I experienced was intolerance of my humanity. I experienced intolerance of my determination to stand up for myself. Anybody who is telling you that you're wrong standing up for yourself they are violating your boundaries. And so then the gaslighting occurs when I'm told from somebody else that I'm actually violating their boundaries with my questions, by questioning their authority, by showing up on their page and questioning their authority. That is a violation of their boundaries. So the manipulation it's both direct and it's aggressive, and it's subtle and it's confusing. And you can tell that you've encountered an interaction like this with either a coach or a teacher or with somebody in your life, because you come away from it feeling confused. You come away from a conversation feeling confused. You come away from a conversation feeling that anything that you've tried to express has been turned against you. And that is that's called gaslighting. And it's designed to make you question yourself and to make you question your reality. Which allows for that dominator mentality to then insert into that place of questioning whatever it is that they want to imprint and leave you with. August says, and they call women the enlightened version of ugly and fat. Call women the enlightened version of ugly and fat. I'm not sure what you mean by that, Glove. Could you elucidate that, please? So when we question them, we're called a witch or a dominant man. Oh, yes. And all I hear when someone says witch is like, oh, hey, like, good to be acknowledged. Thank you. Okay. All right. Let's move on. But the dominant man is, I want to pause because I just lost train of thought, and it's really important. When we question them, we get, yes. Okay. So the other thing that these guys are doing is they're weaponizing the term empowerment they're using it as a means of of making women feel destabilized in their power. So as I said, and one of the posts was like, that empowered women turn men off, like to an unmasculized, to a feminized man, empowered women are scary to a masculine, and then they're just a turnoff. If that's true, that is a really wonderful example to look at why you would perceive anyone else's power to turn you off. Domination, that's a turnoff. Being dominated by someone, unless you're into that kink and you're into it, and you're playing that out in a consensual role, in the bedroom or however you're going to do it, but as a means of relating, and specifically as a means of creating intimacy, is absolutely prohibitive. One of the other things that I'm seeing with these guys is that not only are they doing this with women themselves, but they're teaching it to men. So they're actually kind of teaching this next generation of men who are clearly open and looking for a way to interact in a more integrated way, otherwise they wouldn't be drawn to these teachings, that it's okay to behave in this way, and there is actually a more enlightened way to interact with women. So what you see in these threads with these coaches is that a woman comes in and she says something, one of the teachers jumps on them, and then a whole bunch of other men jump on in support of the teacher, and it's extremely destabilizing. Even if you're used to dealing with this kind of stuff, it can leave you shaken. And if you're not used to dealing with this kind of stuff, it is going to be fundamentally disruptive at a core level. And that's actually specifically what it's intended to do. It's intended to disrupt your sense of self at a core level, because when you've got those cracks in your foundations and your no has been devalued and your boundaries have been violated, you are more susceptible to fucking predation. Jody says, so my therapist is going to gaslight me. Hopefully not. Hopefully a therapist is going to listen to you and give you feedback and share with you, their perspective about what they hear you saying. But the role of a good therapist, as well as a good coach, is largely to listen. And these men are not listening, not in the least. They're absolutely so identified that their way is the right and the only way, that there's no room for any more conversation to be had. That's not intimacy. That's not relating. That's not growth. Tim says, a no is obviously not an expression of dominance. Exactly. Just healthy boundaries. I've seen many men in relationships abdicate any sense of being in the relationship by never saying no. Happy wife, happy life. Never speak up and say no because it's easier than making waves in the relationship. I think a lot of men in relationships don't feel heard in their objections about happenings in the relationship. There is a wave of men not wanting relationships at all because they aren't allowed to be themselves, and relationships and home and social fabric as the realm of the women, where men don't get much say. This probably more in older generations, but I heard a lot of friends express this still. It's the weird old world ideas of gender roles. We hold sway which holds sway where in a relationship. I really love that you brought that up, and thank you. I just want to move into a place of tenderness for the masculine and for the men who do want to be in relationships and who do want to be in mutual and reciprocal relationships and who want to be acknowledged and who want to be valued. And I want that. I want that as a woman. I want to love and adore and worship men, but it's not going to come at the expense of my own sense of safety, self, identity, security, emotional or physical well-being. And it's certainly not going to come at me sacrificing my fucking instincts. No goddamn way. But that is what I want. Hey. Because, I mean, look at the way that lights me up. The thought of being in reciprocal, mutual, respectful relationships with men, sexual, romantic, friendships, familial relationships, all of it, that lights me up as a woman, because in spite of all of this, in spite of the patriarchy, in spite of like the deep wounding I experienced with my relationship with my father and subsequent relationships, I still fucking love men. I want to see y'all thrive, and I want to thrive right alongside of you. And in order for us to thrive together, we need to listen to each other. We need to accept the different nuances of each other. We need to call each other out when we're behaving in a dismissive or a demeaning way. But we need to do it from a place of vulnerability, and that's for both men and women. And these coaches in this paradigm seem to be teaching women to be more vulnerable while teaching men to be more dominant, and that is just going to create even more of a power imbalance within the relationship. That's going to create more confusion. That's going to create more disparity, more distortion. That's not going to create intimacy. The only thing that creates intimacy is honesty and fucking vulnerability. God damn it. La 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 la. Normal man don't learn how to listen, especially to a powerful woman. They're incredibly intimidated by that, just saying. So I think I validate your experience of that 100%. And I would say that potentially some of the women that are coming off as empowered are actually more in that dominant mindset themselves. They're not necessarily 100% coming from a true place of genuine power, because genuine power isn't dominator mindset. It's not power over, it's power with. It's mutuality, it's inclusivity, it's relatability. And it's actually deeply vulnerable, because the only way we can really truly move into power is by knowing that we're safe, and in a sense we have nothing to lose and everything to gain by expressing, by being honest. And a man isn't served and fed by a woman who doesn't have her know. We're empty and vapid. Absolutely. And that's part of what, the conditioning is for women, is to serve until we've emptied ourselves. But that happens to men too, that sort of codependent dynamic where we're conditioned, usually at a pretty early age, that the best way for us to get love and acceptance is by giving of ourselves. And usually we wind up in these relationship dynamics where there's an imbalance in that, and where the balance of the relationship is sort of held in place by the willingness of one person to overgive so the other person can overtake. And I hear this, I've experienced it as a woman in a lot of relationships, but I also hear men talking about this as well, that they have been put into these dynamics that they've given to women who are also gaping black fucking holes of taking. We both do it. This is not, we're going to pin this behavior on men, we're going to pin this behavior on women, and then we're going to train them to move in opposite directions. No. We're going to explore the effects that these behaviors have on each other, take accountability for the way that we behave, and be curious and compassionate with ourselves about why we're behaving in the way that we are. That's vulnerability, that's communication, that's intimacy. That also creates more pressure for men to perform. I'm not sure when this comment came up, so I'm not sure what that is in direct relation to, but I think the pressure on men to perform is huge. And I think in the same way that women's bodies get objectified for being, these sexual objects and toys, men's bodies get objectified in terms of doing labor, of being work, the majority of men in the construction industry or the majority of people in the construction industry are men. So it's men's bodies have been, are seen as a means to an end in a different way. And I think that whether you're physically doing labor or whether you're carrying that mentality out into any of your other jobs or professional engagements, or even within the intimate relationship, that's still really painful. I feel for guys for being in that position. A dominant man who's not in touch with his inner feminine will be a tyrant. Bingo. Bingo. So what does that mean for a man to be in touch with his inner feminine? Comments, thoughts, absolutely. Please share on this one. For me, the most simple expression of that is a willingness to listen. If a man wants to begin to get in touch with that sensitivity and with that inner feminine, the very first, most practical thing that he can do is begin to listen. He listens to himself. He feels his body. He is curious about becoming more in tune with his emotions. He knows his own yes and his own no. And if he's in any of his relationships, he's curious and willing to listen. A vulnerable woman cannot connect to her inner masculine, is ripe for predation. Fucking bingo. And that is what is being conditioned out of these women in these groups by being told that their no is unnecessary. It leaves them vulnerable to predation. And this is why I called these names out specifically, Zach Rode and David Miller, because I have deep concern for women who are moving into these groups who have already been gaslit, abused, groomed, where they're continuing on in that dynamic, and for men who actually want to get in touch with a more healthy way of doing relationship, being trained and being encouraged to move more into that dominant side is going to be damaging and toxic for everybody. This is not to say that everything that they offer is terrible or bad either, because I wouldn't unilaterally say that. I would just say that the overarching theme is of great enough concern to me as someone who is an advocate for clarity, compassion, communication, and intimacy that I feel compelled to fucking talk about it. La 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 la. Yep, the shittiest jobs are held by men. No fucking doubt about it. And we love you for doing it, and we're sorry that we're not more appreciative and respectful about it. Truly. Truly. Men's bodies get thrown away in war. Yes. Oh my god, yes. It's that's one of the greatest tragedies, and women have definitely been joining that foray more recently, but habitually over the centuries, collectively, the trauma that men experience going to war, and then the disrespect that they get coming back, and the confusion and the pain, and the loss and the damage that it does to their relationships, to all of our relationships. I mean, we could go into an entire separate conversation on the damages of war. It's just fucking heartbreaking. And it's horrible that our men are used for cannon fodder. It's horrible. It breaks my fucking heart. And giving exhausts all of our energy and thus our passion for each other. Yes. If we are not in tune with our no, we are draining ourselves of our life force. We're leaking it everywhere. And as I said already, and I think this is important to repeat, our yes loses meaning and passion. August said he feels his body. Yes, he's in contact. Okay, this is what a man who is connecting with his feminine. He feels his body. He's in contact with his own needs and desires. Most importantly, his pain. Yes, yes, yes. Yep. Used as a means and an end. Yes, for bodies. Yep. And you lose contact with your own needs of pain. How can you even begin to connect with a woman when you've been taught to hold your own feminine in content? But I believe the word that you're trying to what's the word? It's not content. A man in touch is compassionate and sensitive to others' needs, not just his own, but only when connected to himself and his own needs. Absolutely. I think the thing that we do, both of us, both sexes, we do this, is we think if we, if we sacrifice our needs for the other person, that they will somehow magically rise to meet our own. That, contempt, thank you. Yes, it's contempt, not contest. And that rarely happens. In truly reciprocal, mutual relationships, the needs of both are valued, and we can take turns compromising on different scenarios and situations, but not on our core values. Love you, have to run. Great topic. Good to see you, Jody. Please take care. I love that these men are teaching men to stand up for being respected, but they're conflating and differentiating reflection with disrespect. Absolutely. And I'm in no way saying that men shouldn't be respected. Yeah, you should. I don't want anything that I'm not willing to give in return. Respect. It's a mutual conversation. We don't go into each other's spaces and demand it. We come humbly with enough self-respect to recognize when respect is being served and when it's possible, and then we engage from that place. And if we find ourselves being disrespected, then we open up a conversation about how we feel with each other and whether or not our core values are in alignment, and if that is something that we can move into through being vulnerable and honest about what our needs and expectations are. That's how grown-ups do it. Autocorrect. Yes, autodefect strikes again. It's a fucking monster. War is an expression of two parties not listening to each other. The more powerful one holds sway and dominates the other, not a relationship. Brilliant. And that is actually that is the core of what we've been talking about with this entire conversation. And as somebody said further up there about matriarchal societies, matriarchal societies are more inclined towards cooperation than domination and war. The Minoans, I believe, were a matriarchal society, and they traded with people rather than going to battle with them. So instead of taking each other's resources, there's more of there's an openness and a curiosity and communication about what the needs are and how can we meet those needs with and for each other, instead of how do I take from you what do I want, or how do I demand you give to me what I think I deserve. No, that's not it. So good conversation, really good conversation, and I don't want to keep it too much longer because I've been close to an hour with this, and I feel like I want to give you back your day, and I want to take back my day. I have writing and walking and playing to do, but let's just come back to center, to body, to connect in. Take a few breaths. We're safe. Anybody who showed up in this conversation, anybody who listens to this conversation later, I would trust that the reason that you would want to be a part of such a conversation is to hopefully further communication and understanding as we move into less and less sort of traditional gender roles, as we kind of come back to our own center, as we get into touch with these different facets and expressions of our humanity, both within ourselves and in the external world. It's expected that confusion is going to arise. It should be expected that distortion is going to arise. It should be expected that we are going to have conflict and confrontation. Some of these ideas that we're discussing have been so deeply insinuated in our collective consciousnesses and individual psyches and in our psyche and soma and body that, as I'm shaking now as I'm talking about it, as they come to the surface for us to be acknowledged and explored, we should expect to be triggered. We should expect to be angry. We should expect to be sad. We should expect to be grieve. that's part of healing. That's part of being vulnerable. That's part of getting in touch with our own ooey gooey core and center, and coming to a place of deeper honesty and integrity. um, it's also how we acknowledge what works and what doesn't. It's how we get honest and hold ourselves and each other accountable. It's how we move through our wounds and take off our armor together. That is the goal. That is my goal of having this conversation, and of a large portion of what I'm sharing and writing about right now is this deep goal that I have, that humans, men and women, however you identify, that we can get deeper in touch with our core humanity, and that we can create safer situations where we can take off our armor together. There needs to be mutual respect. This is not a demand that we put upon each other. This is a request that we make from the bottom of our hearts, and we do our fucking best to uphold safe spaces where it can happen, and where we can have these difficult dialogues and these difficult conversations, and we can move towards each other and not away from each other. We can stop dominating each other and work on cooperating with each other. August says, I'd offer the next step of the conversation is, how do we address this, not from a place of war and othering these men, but engaging with them in a way where they see the value for themselves and healing their shadow stuff. Right now, we're still the enemy to them. Absolutely. And I don't want to be the enemy, which is why this is a really tricky line to delineate, where we need to be able to acknowledge and point out the behaviors and say, yes, this, no, this. And part of that begins with a little bit of othering. We have to recognize that there is a distinction, there is a separation between me and how I feel when I am in alignment with my intuition, my instincts, and I am feeling intrinsically whole, and how I feel when this violator, dominant information is introduced to my field, how I feel in my body, how I feel if I'm in relation with somebody who is modeling those traits and behaviors, be it a personal relationship, a friendship, a professional relationship, or a teacher coach relationship. There needs to be a little bit of othering first so that we can make that distinction. But then there also needs to be the acknowledgement that our goal is to open up, is to communicate. My mission state is to communicate with clarity and compassion about the hard, holy, and human nature of life. That is my fucking core heart mission. That's my purpose on this planet. And I know that we don't get there by othering and creating more and more and more conflict, but we need to be able to do conflict in a way that is meaningful and respectful, and primarily at the start of it creates a sense of safety, because we can't do it when we don't feel safe. So I wanted to bring this up because I want people to know that that you have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to question anyone at any time about anything. And you have the right to take that information into yourself and choose what is your yes, what is your no from moment to moment. Your primary responsibility is to honor that in yourself. And when we all begin to choose to do that, we can engage from a place of more safety and more intimacy with each other, because we're also coming from a place of self and then mutual respect. So thank you guys so much for participating in this. I hope it's beneficial. I hope it's useful. If so, please do share with your friends and family. If the guys who I was talking about on this conversation happen to hear it, or it gets back to them, or any of your followers, please understand that I hold you in a place of deepest compassion, but my primary objective is to make sure that people are safe when exploring these deeper, more ambiguous places within themselves, and particularly with each other. If we can't feel safe, we can't go there, and we want to go there, or we wouldn't be having these conversations. So thank you guys. You can find more about me at illuminationwithjustice.com. I'm a coach, I'm a healer, I do this work for a living. You can follow me on Elephant Journal. My profile is Justice Bartlett. I write about all kinds of stuff And if you have any questions, feel free to privately message me at any time. And please take care of yourselves and each other. Lots of love.